Hey, what's up guys? This is Papa Kilo again, and now I'm looking at a flight which we made on the Kitzbühel Alpenpokal. I think it was competition day number 4. I choose this flight because it's very typical for south wind conditions, and I was able to fly most of the task without circling or doing figures of 8. The waypoints were Lanzen Turnau, far in the east, that is airfield south of the Hochschwab, and then Neukirchen, which is in the direction of the Gerlos Pass. The maximum start altitude was 3000 meters above sea level, and on this day I was able to catch a wave and get high up to 3300 meter pre-start. Since Hochfelsen was active, the first ridge we jumped to were the Loferer, and from there we directly
jetzt bin ich
jumped
abgeflogen. Habe diesmal als erster die Welle im Kaiser erwischt und bin da gut hochgekommen. Deswegen habe ich jetzt eine sehr komfortable Abflughöhe. Ja, wenigstens mal ein geiler Start.
Here you can see me flying to the Steinerne Meer, and I'm slowly dropping to the ridge altitude. As always, there's not much lift before you really sink down to the ridge, and therefore it doesn't make sense to fly too high, but not too low either. Yeah, here you can see that I don't have any lift at this part of the ridge because it's directly streamed on parallel from the wind. In some places you even get into a lee if you fly the Hochkönig.
Ja, ein bisschen weiter halten. Ja, wo der halten wir uns bisschen aufpassen.
Yeah, here you can see exactly why it makes so much sense to fly the Hochkönig at a certain minimum altitude. If you are too low, you have all these little ridges coming out perpendicular to the main ridge, and then you have to get around all these ridges, which keep you away from the main ridge, and you fly mostly in sync. So I can only recommend to fly the Hochkönig at ridge level, or maybe 200 meter below, but not further below. This image, for example, shows another flight where I was simply too low, coming from the east, and I couldn't take any advantage of the Hochkönig and simply dropped down. So while we are at the Hochkönig, let me show you another problem which can happen if you come from the east. So this is the way it looks if you come from the east and you are a little bit too low. If you have strong wind conditions, it can frequently happen that you have a very strong downdraft at the beginning of the Hochkönig. And I already had the situation that I had 5 meter per second downdraft, while other gliders which were at the top of the Hochkönig could easily get away. So this is just a word of caution that if you are coming to the Hochkönig from the east and you have very strong wind, be super careful and be as high as possible to avoid any trouble.
Ja, das ist ein Problem, was ich auch
Well, if you leave the Hochkönig, there are basically 3 options how to continue to the Dachstein. I would generally recommend to go through the Tennengebirge if you have rich conditions. And then that's a green line in the drawing. And then go to the Bischofsmütze and then continue to the Dachstein. If you are high enough, you can also take the yellow line, which is somewhere in between. And if it's more thermal conditions, you can also choose the Hochköndeck line through Hochköndeck and Grossbrand and then directly going Dachstein. This especially makes sense if you have a nice cloud line running through Hochköndeck and Grossbrand, but it's a detour. So in this flight I took the green line through the Tennengebirge, which was definitely the right decision regarding the conditions. If you are entering the Dachstein massif through the Bischofsmütze, you don't need to be very high, because even in 2000 meter behind the Bischofsmütze the ridge gets a little bit lower, and this is a very good place to put some figures of 8 to get high enough for the Dachstein. So this is now the point where you should be at least 2300 meters high, because you will not be able to cross the plateau in front of you, and also if you are not high enough on the main Dachstein ridge, you will not have any good lift, and also you will get into conflict with the cable car. On the other hand, if you fly it in this direction, I would also not recommend to invest too much time to get very high, like 2800 meter or above, because you don't need this altitude, because the ridge behind the Dachstein is descending and you will not need this altitude anyway. This is now where you have to be super careful, because behind this corner there's a cable from the cable car coming down, and in this altitude I'm coming here, I'm very close to the cables, so you really have to see them, you have to look out for them, and you have to be high enough here. So now you can see why it would have been a waste of time to get too high on the Dachstein, because now the ridge is descending in the direction of the Grimming, and it would be a waste of energy to be too high in this place. Here you can see that I was clearly flying too slow, because I'm now above the peak altitude of the Grimming. I should have flown faster with maybe 200 or 220 and then pulling up in the dynamic lift of the Grimming. That would have been the faster and better option. In this Google Map image you can see how we continue from the Grimming. The first massif we are flying to are the Weißenbacher Mauern. Here we will not fly in the highest part. It's a two-step mountain, and the lower step is a little bit in front, and it's usually thermally more active. You don't have to be very high here, and you can really push on hard. Then after that we follow to the Haller Mauern. Fairly nice mountain ridge, which usually works very well. We then follow to the Gesäuse. Then it gets quite difficult in the continuation to the Hochschwab, a little bit more later. Yeah, task speed was 160 km/h here, so I had to make an image of the helix. So now we are coming to the Gesäuse. The Gesäuse is basically the Hochtour to the south and the Buchstein to the north, and the valley in the middle is quite unlandable, so you either have to go back to Eigen, or you have to then go to the north to Mooslandel. And you can enter the Gesäuse if you have good wind, quite low, so even something like 1800, 1850 is completely okay if you come from the east. Here you can see the reason why you can also enter the Gesäuse a little bit lower, because this part of the ridge is low and you can fly around the high part and then try to gain altitude here at this position. Here you can see why it made sense to be a little bit careful in the Gesäuse and get quite high in the end. Because after this little pass you can see here, it's nearly unlandable. And you have to be at least high enough to gain altitude on the left ridge, which is called the Kalte Mauern. So I would not recommend to enter this part of the Hochschwab any lower than this. Here you can see why the Hochschwab is so tricky. You come from the west and fly the green line, but there's a high plateau on the Hochschwab, which is this little red dots, and you have to be high enough to get over this plateau. And there's only a little ridge on the north side on top of this plateau, which you use to keep your altitude. So it is absolutely not recommended to do this much below 2000 meter, otherwise you will get into big trouble here. So this is the reason I added some safety circles here. I'm not 100% sure it was needed, but it gave me much more safety in this case. From this point on you are safe again, because you can escape to the south and reach a lot of outlanding fields, or even Lanzen Turnau, the airfield Lanzen Turnau. The reason I'm flying so slow here is because I have to go to the south, to the turnpike, Lanzen Turnau, and come back high enough. Otherwise it would definitely be possible to speed up here. I'm turning Lanzen Turnau here, and the average speed was still close to 160 km/h at this point. I turned high enough at Lanzen Turnau, so I don't need to make any circles or figures of 8, but I can just follow the ridge again. Here I'm coming from the east, but the problem with the high plateau on the Hochschwab remains the same. So again, you have to be high here. And you can see in the background this little ridge on top of the plateau. This is where I want to be. Get very low at this place, you would take the valley to the right, to the north, and then try to get to the outlanding field, which is called Mooslang. Don't go to the left, which would take you to the Eisenerzer valley without any chance of good outlandings.
Hallo Werner. Hallo Werner. Fahrt aus, schnell so drüber kommen wir, oder? Ja, das geht besser aus. Über der Runde der Höhe. Und du in der Höhe, weil das ist nicht so relevant für mich. Okay.
As you can see here, flying back even 1700 meter MSL is possible, because in the middle of the Gesäuse the ridge drops down and there are places to do figures of 8. And if you need an outlanding field, you have to enter Edmond in your computer, which is a little bit towards the west. And another thing about the Gesäuse which I should mention is that on strong wind days, like more than 60 km/h, the Gesäuse can get extremely turbulent and very nasty, and maybe you should avoid it and stay south of the Gesäuse.
Ich hab das 26 Kilometer, ist kein Problem, oder? Ich hab schon Muskelkater vom Arschbaum kneifen. Wiedersehen. Wenn ich so die Höhe flog, was ist? Die anderen Bücher sind so, die glaubst du mal. Nächste Höhe, die zeigt im Arm.
One word of caution here. On the left side you have the controlled airspace of Aigen, and the maximum altitude is 1500 meter or around something like that of Aigen control, and if you are below that you will violate the airspace. The problem is if you're coming in very low here, like below 1500, the ridge will force you in the airspace, and then your competition will be cancelled at that point. So if you're flying a competition, you should try to be higher than 1500 meter here to not get into this airspace. Don't worry if the grimming doesn't work too well for you. There are enough other options coming in the west, like the Kammspitz and Stoderzinken, to get up. Usually the best climb is on the west side of the Grimming. At this point I would rather prefer to be something like 2400 meter, and here I am below 2200 meter. This has some disadvantages, especially if you enter the main Dachstein part and the cable car part. It's really better if you are 2400 meter. So always I try to find a thermal at this point, but in this case I was not lucky and I couldn't find anything. Here I'm far away from the mountain again. This is because of the cables, and you can see some little red arrows on the mountain which they put there to warn for the cable. The cable itself is invisible, nearly invisible, and it's really difficult to see it, so really be careful here. So I gained 1300 meter in this thermal with an average climb of 5 meter per second. It was peaking close to 6 meter per second for a few circles. Was it a good idea to take the thermal until the top? No, it was not. I could see when I analyzed the flight and compared it to other gliders that it would have been better to stop at maybe 2900 meter and continue to the north and fly along the Tennengebirge again. And what I did was, I thought I'm high enough, I take the southern direct route to Zell am See, and this was definitely a mistake. A good rule seems to be to never take a thermal much higher than the next ridge. So here you can see the correct way, which would be the black one. Again going through the Tennengebirge and through the Hochkönig directly Zell am See. That would have been the perfect line and the best one according to the fastest pilots. So why did I take the south line to the Tauern, which looks fairly strange? Well, I saw some gliders high up in the wave there on the Flam. And I thought there were also some rotor clouds, and I thought that maybe I can catch the wave and fly without a circle in the wave to the last turn point. This turned out to be a mistake that cost me about 15 minutes in this task.
Erste Guido. Jetzt da oben?
Here I'm coming to Zell am See. The airport is south of the lake, and very good thermals can be found either on the Schwittenhöhe, that's the mountain on the western side, or on the Hahnekugel, which is on the east side. So let me give a short recap of the competition day. I think I made a good run on the first leg, where I nearly had 160 km/h task speed, close to that of Werner Ammann. And when I came back, everything was okay until I hit this giant thermal at the Dachstein. At this point, I got a little bit confused and did not go on the ridge because I was actually too high, and so I decided to go directly down. And this was definitely the mistake of the day, because compared to Werner Ammann, which took the ridge through the Tennengebirge, Hochkönig, and then came to Zell am See, I lost more than 10 minutes on this mistake. So finally I was able to score 5th place with 142 km/h, but quite a bit slower than Werner Ammann, who was able to do the same task with a task speed of 154 km/h.